All right, let's talk about Brazil's foreign policy. In a world where it feels like every country is being pushed to pick a side, Brazil seems to be playing a totally different game. They've somehow managed to build these really strong ties with major global powers that are, well, rivals. So, how on earth do they pull off that balancing act? Let's get into it. So, if you had to ask, who are Brazil's most important partners? The answer isn't as simple as pointing to just one country. It's really this complex, fascinating network of relationships, and each one has its own unique story. For this explainer, we're going to focus in on four really big ones. First up, you've got the United States, the historic powerhouse. This relationship was basically forged the moment Brazil became a nation. It's a partnership that's been shaping the Western Hemisphere for, 2 centuries now. Then there's the modern economic titan, China. This is a much newer relationship, but wow, has it exploded in the last few decades. It's completely reshuffled Brazil's trade and its place in the global economy. And then we have Japan, what you might call a traditional partner. This is a bond that's over a century old, and it's built on so much more than just trade. It's really rooted in these deep cultural ties, thanks to Brazil having the largest Japanese community anywhere outside of Japan itself. And finally, there's India, another emerging giant. As a fellow developing power, India is an absolutely crucial piece of Brazil's strategy to help create a more balanced, multi-sided world. So here's our game plan. We'll start at the very beginning, with the origins of these four key relationships. Then we'll see how they were tested during major global conflicts. After that, we'll dive into the huge economic shifts that have really reshaped everything. And finally, we'll look at Brazil's modern strategy of, well, basically playing on multiple teams. So, let's jump right in. To really get a handle on where these relationships are today, we have to rewind all the way back to the start. Each one of them began for a completely different reason, which really set them on their own distinct paths from day one. Okay, so check out this timeline. The relationship with the United States goes way back to 1824. The US was one of the very first countries to recognize Brazil's independence. That's a huge deal. Then you see China and Japan pop up in the late 1800s. And the partnership with India? That's actually the newest of the bunch, kicking off right after India gained its own independence in 1948. And it's not just the dates that matter, it's the reasons for these first connections. The relationship with the US was political right out of the gate, a big strategic move. But the Brazil-Japan connection, that was a whole different story. It was driven by people, by demographics, sparked by the waves of Japanese immigrants who came to work in Sao Paulo's coffee fields starting back in 1908. All right, let's see how the massive conflicts of the 20th century really put these relationships to the test. Big wars, they force countries to pick a side. And for Brazil, those choices were incredibly complex and had consequences that lasted for decades. This quote just sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? It really captures the sheer drama of the situation. For Brazil, World War II wasn't some far-off conflict. It put them directly in opposition to one key Asian power while cementing an alliance with their North American one. The contrast here was just night and day. On one side, Brazil was a solid ally of the United States. They even sent their own troops, the famous Pracinhas, to fight side by side with American forces in Italy. But on the other hand, they completely broke off relations with Japan in 1942 and then officially declared war on them in 1945. And the Cold War? That was another period of some seriously tricky maneuvering. Initially, Brazil was firmly in the US camp, but look closer at the details. They refused to recognize Mao's communist China for decades, even voting against them joining the UN as late as 1971. But at the same time, Brazil started finding common ground with countries like India, working together at the UN to champion the interests of developing nations. It was a real sign of its independent foreign policy starting to emerge. Okay, now let's fast forward to the massive economic shifts we've seen in the last few decades. Honestly, more than any war or political alliance, it's been the flow of money and goods that has completely redefined Brazil's partnerships and its role in the world. For a very, very long time, the economic story was pretty straightforward. The United States was the center of Brazil's economic universe. It was their main trading partner, their biggest investor, the undisputed number one. End of story. But then that story changed, and it changed fast. In 2009, China blew past the US to become Brazil's top trading partner, and it's held that top spot ever since. This was a seismic shift in Brazil's economic focus. And this table is super interesting because it shows what is actually being traded. You can see a clear pattern. When Brazil sells to its Asian partners, we're talking China, Japan, and India, it's mostly big commodities. Think soy, iron, or oil. But the trade with the United States, it's much more diverse, including high-value stuff like aircraft. And what does Brazil buy in return from all four of them? Pretty much the same thing across the board, industrialized goods. So how does Brazil manage all these complex relationships today in the 21st century? Well, it does it by being part of these overlapping and sometimes, even contradictory strategic groups. It's kind of like playing for multiple teams at the exact same time. First, you've got BRICS. This is where Brazil teams up with China and India, plus Russia and South Africa. This group was explicitly designed to boost the influence of emerging economies and push for reforms to a global system that they feel is, well, pretty dominated by the West. But then you have the G4. And here, Brazil is working with Japan, India, and Germany with one very specific, very clear goal: getting permanent seats on the UN Security Council. So here, they're trying to reform the global power structure from the inside. And here's the really brilliant part. Brazil doesn't see these groups as an either-or situation. One group, BRICS, is about building alternatives to the Western-led order. The other, the G4, is about getting a bigger seat at that very same table. It's a totally pragmatic approach. And did you notice who's in both groups? India, a key partner for Brazil on multiple fronts. So all of this brings us right up to the present day and to the absolute core of Brazil's strategy for navigating the 21st century. At the end of the day, it's all about a carefully calculated, very high-stakes balancing act. Really, what it boils down to is this. Brazil's grand strategy is one of intentional non-alignment. It is not about choosing the US or China. It's not about choosing the West or the developing world. It's about engaging with all of them on Brazil's own terms to get the most for itself, the most autonomy, the most economic opportunity, and the most influence on the world stage. Look, this strategy has served Brazil incredibly well so far in our messy, multipolar world. But as global tensions keep ratcheting up and major powers start demanding clearer loyalties, you have to ask the big question: how much longer can this delicate balancing act possibly last? And that is a question the entire world is going to be watching very, very closely.